What's up guys? Today we will be going over the Rapier, a weapon with fierce damage per second, or DPS for short. I strongly believe this weapon is going to be one of the best in terms of high DPS with no survivability. A strong glass cannon weapon for single target damage in both PvE and PvP, and a crazy pair with the Warhammer and Hatchet, which we will go over later. Most weapons have some sort of survivability or crowd control tucked away in their kit, but with the Rapier they asked themselves, how much damage will it do? And the answer they got back was yes. This weapon has almost all damage, with only a couple parry and mobility passives. So what is the Rapier, and what are the abilities? The Rapier is a dexterity based weapon with a side stat of intelligence. It has two skill trees, Blood and Grace. The Blood tree has raw damage, with a focus around damage over time, and a sudden burst of damage, with pretty much zero mobility or survivability. The Grace tree is also mostly damage, but this one has a little more evasion and mobility, with the parry ability. So for this weapon, we will be focusing on the damage of it, as there is no other weapon that even comes close to matching the amount of damage this absolute monster can put out. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I'm close to 100 subs, which is insane to think about, and I really can't thank you all enough. Now, let's look at the abilities and passives that make the Rapier a damage powerhouse. Let's start with the Blood tree, and its 3 active abilities and notable passive upgrades. First we have Tondo. Slash so quickly that it extends the reach of your blade. This strike deals direct damage, but also applies a bleed that will deal 100% weapon damage over 12 seconds. This can stack up to 3 times, refreshing previous applications as well. With one passive of note called And Again, which reduces the cooldown of Tondo by 15% if any enemy is hit, even if it's blocked. Next we have Flurry, where you enter a posed stance and unleash a series of 5 quick thrust attacks, with each strike dealing more damage. Flurry can be dodge cancelled at any time, a devastating ability if you can land it. It has 2 passive abilities of note. The first is Fleeting Strikes. Each hit with the Flurry reduces the cooldown of this ability by 7%. The second one is To the Bone. Each hit of Flurry extends the Rapier's bleeds by 1 second, which refreshes and extends any current bleed. The third ability is Flourish and Finish. Flourish performs an attack knocking back enemies. Pressing light attack at the end of the flourish will continue this ability by automatically performing Finish. Finish lunges forwards, consuming all Rapier bleeds on any target hit, dealing 110% of their damage immediately. An absolute nuke of a ability that I'm fairly sure could one-shot most players if done right. There's 2 passives of note, the first being Fuel. Each tick of the damage from Tondo's bleed reduces the cooldown of this ability by 5%. The second is Bloody End. Finish deals 150% of the Rapier's bleed damage instead of 110%. This tree has 4 passive abilities that amplify the damage even more. The first one is On Guard. Deal 10% more damage when your target has greater than 50% health. The second is Refreshing Strikes. Reduce all cooldowns by 1% on any hit, stacking with the passives from Tondo and Flurry, giving even more cooldown reduction. The third is Unerring. Deal 5% more damage to targets with a Rapier bleed. The fourth is Heavy Puncture. Any heavy attack on a bleeding enemy will extend their Rapier bleeds by 2 seconds. This will also apply to future stacked applications of the same bleed, extending the entire stack. Up next we have the Grace tree, which has the most mobility of the 2, and also a parry ability. Now, let's go ahead and get into the 3 abilities on this tree. First up we have Evade. Perform a small, reliable sidestep in your current movement direction that cancels any current activity and provides a momentary invulnerability. Light attacks made during Evade are performed exceptionally fast, with one passive of note called Crescendo. where individual successful light attacks reduce the cooldown of evade by 30% each attack. The next ability is Riposte. Enter into a defensive stance for 1 second. If struck during this ability, counter the attack, stunning them briefly for 1.5 seconds. You are briefly invulnerable upon a successful riposte. It has 2 passives of note. The first one is called Insult to Injury, where if you riposte successfully, all of your attacks become uninterruptible for 3 seconds. And the next one is Priority, that reduces the cooldown on all Rapier abilities if you land a successful riposte. The final ability for the Rapier is Flèche. Leave the ground lunging forward 10 meters in a stabbing motion, piercing through enemies. There's 2 passives of note. The first one is called Quick Lunge, which reduces the cooldown of Flèche by 80% if you get a kill with Flèche, which gives me Genji vibes from Overwatch. The second passive is Backside. After performing Flèche, your next critical strike will deal 15% more damage, lasts for 5 seconds. There's a passive on this tree that's pretty good, and it can be tied into the blood tree for a ton of cooldown reduction. It's called Red Curtains. Critical strikes reduce all cooldowns by 5%. And the final passive at the bottom of the grace tree is Momentum. Gain 25% increased damage on your next light or heavy attack after performing a ability. It ends on hit or after 3 seconds, which, if paired with the cooldown reduction build, it could be one of the strongest passives here if you weave autos in between every ability. Alright, so now that we know all of the Rapier's abilities, I'm sure you can see why this weapon will be an absolute powerhouse. If someone gets on top of you with the Rapier, you're probably dead, unless you have some strong escape or CC. The one downfall of this weapon, and it's pretty obvious, is its lack of survivability and CC, which is why I chose the Warhammer and Hatchet. The Warhammer has a fair amount of CC, with some passives that will give you more survivability, and the Hatchet will allow you to pump out an unbelievable amount of damage with the safety net of a gap closer and increased movement speed for mobility, each allowing you to take full advantage of the Rapier's close range advantage. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the abilities and passives for the Warhammer and Hatchet that I think will pair the Rapier perfectly, and I think you'll start to see why. First, we have the Warhammer, a massive melee hammer that scales solely off of strength. The tree we will look at is the Crowd Crusher, as it offers a ton of CC and useful debuffs. The first ability is Shockwave. Slam the hammer into the ground, causing a 3 meteor radius AoE earthquake that deals 90% weapon damage. And it applies stun to all impacted targets for almost 2 seconds, which has 2 passives that decrease the damage dealt from many enemies by 10% for 5 seconds, and another that increases the range of the attack, making it insane with a melee build. This skill is extremely good, as it's a AoE stun, making it harder to miss, and you can use it as either an opener or try to prevent your enemy from escaping. The next ability is Clear Out, a wide swing that knocks back enemies 4 meters to create distance. It deals 110% weapon damage, and this ability can create a little space to reposition, and on top of that, it knocks them back, making them do an animation to stand up. And it has some passives that give you 10% defense bonus to all friendlies within 6 meters for 4 seconds, and another that gives you 30% movement speed for 3 seconds, allowing you to get right back on your target if you want to, with more defense. And the final ability is Path of Destiny, a powerful ground strike that erupts in a linear wave of energy in front of the player, dealing 125% weapon damage to all targets in its path, which has a passive that staggers all enemies in the path, which gives you more chances to keep your enemy locked into the fight with you. There's some passive abilities on this tree that plays really well with the Rapier, like increased movement speed, increased armor, a passive heal, and increased damage against enemies that have a Warhammer debuff. Once you're on top of someone with this setup, it's going to be very hard for them to escape with all the speed bonuses you get on top of some CC. And since the Rapier does so much damage, it's very unlikely that they will be able to outdamage you. So now that we've gone over the safer option, let's talk about the risky option that will have all the damage you will ever need, but with very little sustain: the Rapier and Hatchet. The Hatchet is a melee weapon that scales from strength with a secondary of dexterity, and it, along with the Rapier, is an absolute savage up close. So let me go over a few of the abilities and passives and tell you why these weapons might be so damn good together. We will be looking at the Berserker tree for this one. The first ability is Berserk. Trigger a Berserk mode that increases all attack damage by 20% while active. Berserk mode will be active for 15 seconds. Every passive for this ability is insane. There's 20% increased movement speed, 30% heal when Berserk ends, all debuffs and crowd control are removed, and your attacks are uninterruptible. This ability alone is an amazing pair with the Rapier. It helps pump out damage in every way. The enemy might try to run, but that's where the second ability comes in, called Feral Rush, a sprinting melee attack that causes the player to leap forward, hitting twice. The first hit deals 100%, and the second two deals 115% weapon damage, which comes with a passive to root a target in place for 2 seconds if you hit them in the back. Then into our next ability, Raging Torrent. Perform 4 fast attacks dealing 80% weapon damage, which comes with a passive that gives 20% movement speed for 6 seconds if an enemy is hit, which is an easy combo if the target is rooted by Feral Rush. The Berserk tree also comes with a few amazing passives thrown around, like Heavy Attacks Great in Power, which gives 30% increased damage for 3 seconds, 10% damage for every enemy within 5 meters of you, and the best one at the very bottom, Defy Death, which is when you receive lethal damage, you avoid death for 4 seconds, but your HP will be 0 for that time. This combo is the most risky, but if you're skilled enough to make it work, it will be one of the most potent up-close weapon combos the game has to offer, in my opinion. If you've made it this far in the video, I have another one you will like, where we go over the Ice Gauntlet and what it specializes in. It's also another weapon that will pair with the Rapier perfectly. If you want to know why, I'll leave a link up above. Be sure to check it out. I hope you all enjoyed the video or found it useful. I will be making more videos just like this one, so be sure to keep an eye out for it. That's it for this one, and as always guys, have a good one.